Сайн байцгаана уу хүнд үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр манай Defacto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор НҮБ-ын Хөгжлийн программын Суурин төлөөлөгч халагтай ИЛЕЙН КОНКИЕВИЧ оролцож байна. Бид өнөөдөр энэ гэр бүлийн хүчирхийлэлтэй холбоотой хүйс энэ тендер чиглэлтэй холбоотой энэ асуудлыг хэлцэх гэж байна.
ИЛЕЙН КОНКИЕВИЧ Нэгдсэн үндэстний байгууллагын хөгжлийн хөтөлбөрийн Монгол Улс дахь суурин төлөөлөгч. Америк нэгдсэн улсын Орегоны их сургуулийн Роберт Кларкийн нэрэмжит коллежийг Герман олон улсын харилцааны чиглэлээр бакалавр, Орос ба Зүүн Европын харилцааны чиглэлээр сертификаттай төгссөн бөгөөд энэ хугацаанд Германы Фрайбург их сургуульд 2 жил суралцсан. Америк нэгдсэн улсын Вашингтон хот дахь Америкийн их сургуулийн олон улсын харилцааны сургуулийн зөвлөлт судлал, энх тайван, мөргөлдөөнийг шийдвэрлэх олон улс судлалын чиглэлээр магистрийн зэргийг хамгаалсан. Англи, Герман, Орос хэлээр чөлөөтэй ярьдаг. 2014-өөс 2019 онд Нэгдсэн үндэстний байгууллагын эмэгтэйчүүдийн байгууллагын Казахстан улс дахь төлөөлөгч ба олон улсын төлөөлөгчийн газрын тэргүүн. Европын аюулгүй байдал хамтын ажиллагааны байгууллага, мөн Нэгдсэн үндэстний байгууллагын бусад байгууллагууд болон Зүүн Европ, Балкан, Кавказ, Төв Азийн хэд хэдэн оронд олон улсын төрийн бус байгууллагуудад ажиллаж байсан туршлагатай. Тэрээр засаглал, хүний эрх, хууль дээдлэх ёс, гендерийн тэгш байдлыг хангах, ардчилсан институцийг төлөвшүүлэх, мөргөлдөөн шийдвэрлэх, урьдчилан сэргийлэх дипломатчин чиглэлээр 30 орчим жил ажилласан туршлагатай олон улсын хөгжлийн чиглэлийн мэргэжилтэн юм.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So we are celebrating a particular day these days in Mongolia like many other countries in the world. Please tell us about this event.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be with you to speak about a very important topic, elimination of violence against women and girls. This is commemorated every year on the International Day to Eliminate Violence Against Women and Girls, which is the 25th of November. And that starts the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which runs every year through the 10th of December. And the 10th of December is Human Rights Day. So this 16-day period is a global campaign that's existed since 1991, and all the countries around the world, including Mongolia, take part in this campaign.
Yeah, the issue is about violence against gender-based violence against women and girls, you said. Now we have been celebrating, the world in fact has been celebrating it for years. So what's the specific of this year?
The focus this year of the campaign globally, but also in Mongolia, is to take action against gender-based violence, in particular violence against women and girls. And in order to do that, particularly this year, the campaign in Mongolia is focusing on engaging men and boys in this work because it's a collective responsibility. So first, it's great that you're a male champion on this topic and joining in the important discussion around it and joining in and showing orange in support of the campaign. It's very important. And men and boys are very important to be engaged, one, because unfortunately 95% of perpetrators of the violence against women and girls is perpetrated by men and boys. And
In Mongolia?
In Mongolia, yes, in Mongolia. Mm-hmm. And also men and boys need to be part of the solution on the eradication of violence against women and girls.
So that's why what kind of particular actions are made to involve men and boys in Mongolia?
The different work that we're doing is UNDP, but overall UN agencies and other partners to engage men and boys is through awareness raising, sensitization around the subject, having discussions and engaging men and boys in collective action. This can also be through providing information on what exactly is gender-based violence, the different types of it. There's 5 different types of the violence, and having open discussions and engaging men and boys, in particular youth as well, in these discussions, to have discussions in the household, in the families, in the communities about this topic. Also speaking with senior male leaders in the country on the importance of the issue, government officials, parliamentarians, even leaders in business, others, men, so that they're more aware of the topic, more sensitive to it.
Okay, let's talk about the current state of this unfortunate actions happening in this country, not only in this country, but let's focus on the particularity of this country. You said 5 types of domestic violence, home violence, gender-based violence.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Sure. First and foremost, violence, gender-based violence is a human rights violation. And there are 5 different types of this. First is economic violence. Then there's psychological violence, emotional violence, sexual violence, and physical violence. Those are the 5 different categories of gender-based violence.
You said economic, physical, psychological, emotional, and
sexual.
Sexual and
economic, physical, emotional, sexual, and physical.
Physical. Okay. Let's go one by one.
Sure.
On the economic one.
Economic violence is where a perpetrator restricts the access to money, funds, bank accounts of a woman in this case. For example, a husband or a partner doesn't give any resources to the woman to purchase basic needs, necessities, doesn't give them access to bank accounts or to family funds, limits their spending.
Okay, let's go a little bit specific on this particular type of crime. You said about the access to the money. Here in Mongolia recently we have more so-called, living together, but not officially registered as a family. It looks like that trend is big. And usually if there is in a dispute, a woman became really exactly that victim of that type of violence. In that regard, what is the statistics first? Because it's not family officially in our law, and there is looks like big difference between home violence, family violence. Because in a family, in a house, in an apartment, even 3 generations leave. The violence can be not necessarily between a husband and a wife. And sometimes they are not husband and wife officially. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, gender-based violence is not only between legally married spouses. It's between anybody. So it can be between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. It can be between spouses, partners that are living together. So the point of gender-based violence is that it's a harmful act against anyone, particularly targeted or perpetrated because of their gender. So in this case, women and girls.
And yet we don't have particular statistics on that. For example, we have where is physically hit or whatever, kicked, whatever, and when they are reporting police, then we only know some statistics.
Sure.
Otherwise, all this thing is happening behind the closed door, and if you don't hear, and and Mongolia has a particular law, and you need to report if you see, witnessing, or hearing their family violence in home. What is, in that sense, Mongolia is doing, good or bad?
Actually, there are official statistics on domestic violence and violence against women and girls. And in addition to that, in 2017, the United Nations Population Fund with the National Committee on Gender Equality did do a study, a survey on domestic violence, violence against women and girls in Mongolia, which provided statistics for violence perpetrated by intimate partners as well as non-intimate partners, and it covered different types of violence. And so there is some data available for that. Indeed, as you mentioned, the vast majority of cases go unreported by women because out of fear of, one, the law enforcement agencies not being able to manage or effectively handle the cases, fear of retaliation or within the family or the community. There's a high stigma, of course, also to report these acts of violence, no matter what kind they are. And it may also, unfortunately, result in repeat violence, because the offender or the perpetrator gets angry If a woman goes to seek help, for example, or the family may convince the woman not to go for help because they view it as a shame on the family to bring these things to officials.
And also, there is a certain isolation center in Ulaanbaatar, in Mongolia, all around the country. And if extreme violence happening, then they take away the child, children, keep her around even 2 months or so, and then they go back. And no guarantee that it is happening again. So in that cases, what kind of international best practice?
Yeah, this is a very good question. There's a number of one-stop service centers, as they're called in Mongolia, which provide different services to survivors of domestic violence or gender-based violence, which can be women or girls and children, if you're talking about child abuse. And very often, and the shelters, of course, which are, as you're mentioning, places where women who are victims of violence can go to get protection and get help. But very often, removing the woman with the child to these shelters puts even more stress on the woman and makes it more difficult for her and her children to continue living a normal life. And one proposal that actually has been made in international realm, which is a very interesting one to consider, is instead of taking the woman and the children out of the household into the shelter, but rather the man, who's the perpetrator, should be taken out and should be isolated and should be put in treatment, like psychological counseling, other sort of support.
Have we been doing that?
No, I don't believe that's been happening here or in very many countries. But it is a kind of new approach, which to my mind makes a lot of sense. Because again, why should you take the woman out of the household when she's done nothing wrong, right? Perpetrator should be.
In that sense, for example, there is a child money in the country. And 100,000 tugrix per month per child to family goes. But there is no clear evidence that all this money goes to whom it is devoted. Yet we have statistics that on the day the money is distributed, that night we have more people staying or arrested or staying in the sobering places.
Yeah.
How do you find this correlations?
Fortunately, substance abuse, whether alcohol or drugs, is one main cause of violence, of domestic violence, and also against child violence, child abuse. Not the only cause, but one of the causes. So it would be interesting to do a study on the correlation of whether, as you mentioned, when child money payments are going out, the alcohol purchases are going up, probably, or the use of alcohol is going up. That's a kind of implied correlation by the fact if more people, presumably men mainly, are ending up in these sobering facilities. It means their alcohol use is going up in that connection.
Why they are not doing that survey until now?
I don't know. It's a good thing. We should see
how
about
about
how
you
to
are
facilitate
pushing the government to do so.
Yeah. It would be a good thing we can take up with the Gender Equality Commission and others.
Budget you have helping or supporting Mongolians to take actions against this kind of violence against women and girls?
Well, I can speak on behalf of what UNDP is doing. We have funds that we spend on awareness-raising campaigns, but we're also concretely under some of our projects. For example, we have a large project on civil service reform funded by the Government of Canada, where we work particularly on combating sexual harassment within the civil service. And even here, a survey was done under the project which showed that there is a high level of sexual harassment in the civil service. 1 in 4 respondents indicated that they had been subject to some form of sexual harassment while being a civil servant.
1 in 4?
1 in 4.
In the public offices?
Yeah, in the civil, among administrative civil servants specifically.
Is it high compared with other countries, or if there is any statistics?
Yeah, this is again, unfortunately, the numbers globally are pretty similar from country to country, and this is a high number because that means 25%. And also of those, only 10% say that they actually report it. So if you put those things together, it probably means the actual occurrence of sexual harassment in the civil service is higher.
Let's go to the second type of psychological. What do we understand under that?
Yeah, psychological is putting pressure or coercion or duress of a psychological nature against a woman. Not allowing her to go out, to go where she wants, to meet with her friends when she wants, to dress as she would like, and putting pressure, this sort of psychological pressure. It's very similar to emotional violence. Emotional violence is also, treating a woman in a very demeaning way, insulting way, not being kind. These two types of violence are very closely linked and very often occur by both mainly intimate partners or family members,
not
but also by others.
Not allowing a woman to go wherever she wants, to any place, to friends, etc.
Yeah, or controlling behaviors, like controlling her texts, her SMSs, where are you going, what are you doing, when are you going to be home, who did you meet with. Also, like asking for passwords of phones or email accounts so that they can monitor and check constantly.
How to get the people to understand that even checking somebody's message is also violence.
Yeah, it is. It's a form of psychological and emotional, creating an emotional stress and a violence, because every individual, every person has their own human rights, and they have their own right to privacy.
Own space.
And their own right to private space, which is theirs alone and no one owns it.
How to get the people, in particular, at their young age, to understand that? What kind of do we do? Do we make a special program in schools, or what is the best experiences in the world in that regard?
Well, two things. One is obviously within the household. I mean, parents raising children, boys and girls need to raise them with these understandings that boys and girls are equal, have equal opportunities. There's no one sex that's better or stronger than the other.
No, in Mongolia they say the boys even should not cry because they are men.
That's in many countries. But I mean, males are human beings too. You're a human being too. Yes. You can also have emotions and be sad and cry. It's a normal human emotion. It's not a female emotion. It's a human emotion.
And from all the young age, they separate the behavior of a man and woman. And woman should do this and that. Good woman, good man should be doing this and that. This kind of
stereotypes, gender stereotypes.
And they are explained like it's a traditional thing, so you don't touch it, kind of. All right, so psychological, and yet we don't have statistics on that type of violence, isn't it?
On the psychological, no. It's mainly on the physical, the sexual violence, these sorts. There's more
okay, let's talk about
available.
The third type, emotional. What is that?
Yeah, as mentioned, the emotional is very much the demeaning treatment of a woman or a girl through the comments that one makes about how they look or how they act in a negative and a derogatory way or in a pressuring way. And this affects then, of course, the emotion of a woman by making her feel inferior or less than a man or even sometimes a human being, depending on how bad the emotional violence can be.
This is a bigger issue of how you bring up a child.
Yes, very
in
much
their
so.
family and in their attitude. That usually a child is a reflection of the attitude at the home, right?
Exactly. Yeah, everything starts in the home, in the household, in the family. So that's why, as I mentioned, it's very important to start at a very early age, like even toddlers.
So
then it has to be reinforced in school, of course, through the schools and the education program, already from kindergarten up.
That's why the violence starts in the mind first, and it comes in words and in action.
Sure, because boys are also taught to be strong, to fight, even physically fight, fist fight, defend your rights, if you're not fighting and physically you're not strong, you're not a male, and this is a wrong gender.
In many countries, almost in all countries, in schools, in primary schools even, there is a phenomena called bullying. How to fight with this bullying?
Yeah.
What are the best cases?
Yeah, there's bullying in schools through social media, through physical bullying. There's also bullying online now against women, female politicians in Mongolia that's going on. So it not only happens in schools, it happens in the open public sector, public space, as well. And the way to counter that, counter bullying, is really to work on the gender stereotypes, to bring up boys to, respect girls and females for being equal, not better, not, different in that way, but really respecting that both have their human rights, have their roles to play and their contribution to society, and that girls can do anything they want to do in their career, in their life, and their aspirations. And that has to be, brought in as a form of respect from early age.
Traditionally, even there was a old saying that a woman has a short mind but long hair. This kind of, very abusive habits making also that trend longer. But however, good news to me is quite recently, nowadays, I would say, Mongolian women have in society even stronger now positions, higher positions, not at the level of parliament or government, but at in the hierarchy of the corporations ladder. And women are coming up, as you see, and they are more powerful, more educated, and more. And that's, in that context, we see now single mothers more. They tend to be more, responsible for their own life and not necessarily asking somebody to enter into their life, etc. In that context, do you see any positive change in this country?
Yes, there are increasing numbers of women, particularly CEOs in Mongolia, that are moving into these positions of power, as they're called, but they're decision-making positions. Yes. And unfortunately, there's not enough seen yet in women in the decision-making level in the public sector. And this is something that we, as UNDP, are also working on with support from KOICA, Korean KOICA, to increase the number of women in decision-making, political decision-making positions through the next elections. And this will help also in this regard, because having more women in politics and in decision-making will contribute to also utilization of state budget, developing policy, which of course, in representing the interests of women who are of course 50%, actually slightly more than 50% of the population in Mongolia. So they need to have, the space to also contribute equally, on equal terms, to decision-making, including on issues of how violence against women, harassment, bullying against women is dealt with by the government, by the state, by public actors.
Well, in that context, I'm always wondering why these Scandinavian countries having more than a half women.
Some countries do,
yes. What is the driver behind?
The driver behind is because they recognize and realize that society will be better off and families will be happier and life will be more secure when women have equal representation as men do. It actually brings better results for the country and happiness and overall well-being of a country. And you see that by the quality of life. In Scandinavian countries and other countries.
True. Wherever there are more women, there would be less corruption even. There is the international survey says. So I think our government, this current Prime Minister government, as it is very much thriving to be less than 100th in the corruption index, where now we has 111th out of 180 countries.
Yeah.
And if we want to have more lower positions or upper in the ladder, then we should have more women even, I think, in this regard.
Definitely.
Let's talk about the next type of violence, sexual violence.
Yeah.
So, and we shortly talked about sexual harassment in public offices.
Yeah.
How to get this sexual education, which is not much, to my understanding, clearly determined and given to school children, in particular at their age, adolescence. This kind of.
Absolutely.
What is your observation on that?
Yeah, when we speak about sexual violence, sexual harassment is one form. Another form is rape, of course. And it's not only the act, but it's also the threat of these actions. So threatening sexual harassment or threatening rape or other forms of sexual violence are it doesn't have to be the actual act committed. So that we also have to understand as well. And when we talk about prevention, which is really needed, education and prevention on these issues, the most important concept for people to understand is consent. That in order for any sexual act to happen between any individuals, there has to be consent. And on this, that means there has to be an affirmative consent, meaning the only yes is yes when we talk about sexual relations. A no, a maybe, an absence of a response is not consent. If there is no consent, anything that happens without an affirmative consent can be considered a form of sexual violence. And that's very concerning because many people don't understand that. So we have to educate people that, to understand there has to be really this affirmative consent, which is
how to get that point of consent in the mind of a little boy before he became a man.
Yeah.
How to get, what is the best practice in the world?
Best practices are certainly to do it in school under sexual education classes or reproductive health classes. Also needs to be raised and reinforced in the household among the parents.
Have you seen the Mongolian program of reproductive sexual education?
No,
programs?
I haven't reviewed it.
I suggest you go and check it, and you will see where we can improve.
Yeah.
It's kind of a taboo. I mean,
it is, and it's very limited in focus, more but biological issues. Yeah.
When you don't talk it, when they are doing it secretly, secretly, they do it through social media, Facebook, and they find a way how to all this work. Then they have very skewed imagining, understanding, and it is more probability to be more violent than vice versa. And we talk about it. I think you, through your program, if you will find that way of impacting, look at through our curriculum in the schools how they consider that issue.
Yeah.
Otherwise, in the vacuum of knowledge, that space is filled with all this rubbish information, which makes the kids more aggressive and less respectable.
Yes. You mentioned boys. Just to add, it is important to raise these issues with boys, but it's also important, and that's the focus of this year's campaign of working with men and boys, but it's also equally important that girls understand or are empowered to speak up, to say no. To understand that it's acceptable. Yeah, they shouldn't just have to feel coerced, not respond, give an unsure answer, which then the male interprets as a consent when it's not really a consent.
It is not the only issue of sex or sexual violence.
Yeah.
It's an issue of self-confidence, a way of expressing their thoughts, which I saw in Western countries, in a family. They approach the child as a grown-up person.
Yes.
Because they take it, first of all, as a person, not as a child.
Yes, this is important.
This
is a good approach.
Due respect. And even at the table, they have proper seats, etc. Even some, where they are short and proper seats, and they're sitting and talking. And this kind of, obviously, also it is a living conditions issue. I've grown up in Gir district, worker family, son, 3 sons, a daughter. There was not such that conditions. You obtain that knowledge through many mistakes, through many circumstances, colleagues, and that should be, I think, also included into. I think from that small things, all the things starts.
Yeah, we raised in the education through the family, through the schools, but also through the media. So what you're doing in this program is very good because it's raising the awareness as well. Because it also has to go through open media channels to also educate the public and the population on these issues. So it's really good that this discussion is taking place as part of the campaign this year.
Okay, let's talk about the last one, the fifth one, physical violence, where physically damage, bringing certain harm to the health of the person, look of the person. And say we got some statistics on that, because in bad cases they call police comes, they go to the isolation, etc., the shelter, or they take it also to a hospital. Otherwise these people can die, or maybe in cases they can maybe not afford, cannot afford the treatment. So what's the situation in Mongolia on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are recurring cases of physical violence, which can be everything from hitting, slapping, punching, throwing objects at a person, injuring them, providing them, some sort of, to the point where they're really physically injured, even brain trauma, broken bones, biting. A lot of different forms of physical violence are taking place. And some of them which have traumatic consequences. There have been women who have died in Mongolia through this sort of physical violence that has been perpetrated against them, and that's very sad.
Please tell us some statistics, if you have, whether it is increasing or decreasing in the country.
Yeah, generally speaking, these forms, particularly during the lockdown, there was an increase. There was also, but the difficulty was that they weren't reported, so they came out kind of afterwards, in informal channels, because during the lockdown, women and girls were, of course, at home. There were very stressful situations due to the lockdown, to fear of, the COVID pandemic, loss of income from job, increased alcohol use because of these stresses. And when you're in a very confined space, those tensions can boil over, like a pot boiling over, and very often, unfortunately, that results in increased physical violence. And as we discussed before, actually the minority of cases are reported to officials, or to the police, or to social workers or other people, for the reasons we discussed about fear of not wanting to speak up, causing any so-called shame when it's not really a shame. The shame is on the perpetrator, not on the victim or the survivor of such violence.
This physical violence to me looks like just the tip of iceberg, what we see. What's behind is 9 of 10th is under the water. Yeah. And that's, I think, the particular subject we need all society to address. In that sense, how do you find legal environment in the country against this kind of violence? Is it good? If you say 5, how satisfactory is this?
Maybe a 3. In the sense there's more to be done. Domestic violence is covered through a separate law, which is good in Mongolia. But there's also the difference between how violence is rated, meaning is it a crime or is it more an administrative offense? Kind of the severity of the violence is characterized in this way. And even if the legislation has good provisions in it, they're not fully implemented or enforced, through the law enforcement agencies, through the courts, through different aspects, and that is indeed a problem. And because that's not done, that's also a deterrent for women to report, because if they don't feel confident, it will be dealt with.
If there is a particular evaluation of that human rights and situation, and legal environment situation, in terms of fighting the whole society against the violence, have you made any comparison, evaluation of Mongolian case?
Of the legal framework, you mean, or
total legal framework?
Yeah, like I said, there's good provisions in the law, but the implementation is still still an issue. But, and even the United Nations Human Rights Council, which does the Universal Periodic Review, and the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, both have in their recommendations to Mongolia to address the legislative issues, the enforcement, training, etc.
I should congratulate you for the last visit of the working group of Human Rights Commission, where they were talking about arbitrary detention. 99%. It's a terrible statistics, and I would be very happy to see what the country does and what the UN watches, and what would be, say, your take after 1 year after that visit.
Sure.
Because they're very comprehensive, detailed report, which is very concerning us. The other thing is, one thing is regulating through legal framework, but there is certain ethical principles that the society should grow on, and also there should be religion and other regulating the human violence or human relations without violence. What is your take on that?
Yeah, as mentioned, coming from the United Nations and all the UN agencies, including UNDP, we fully recognize the international norms, which are the basis. And the basis is that we all have human rights, and human rights are legally binding, set out in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. And no culture or tradition or other can take away from those international human rights. So in each and every individual has those rights, be they male, female, or any sexual orientation, are protected under these legally binding human rights. And that is the starting point that we have to look at these issues from. And while we must be sensitive and understanding of cultures and traditions, we don't just want to say they're not important or not relevant, but we have to recognize that we are talking about human rights here, and that is the basis of importance for this discussion. And every woman and every girl has equal, from birth, they're not granted human rights. You don't earn them through your lifetime. You're born with them, and those need to be respected.
Exactly, and I like this, your protector of that is precious to you. Yourself, your family, your community, right? That's the logo for this year.
Yeah, the joint campaign, which many UN agencies and partners, development partners are
16
supporting.
16 days activism against gender-based violence, right? Actually, this is, we need to watch it not 16 days all around the year, but this
365 days we need to do,
This 16 days of particular warning or concerning really focus us on the issues we need to solve anyway.
Yes.
As we find it's one of the civilized country.
Absolutely.
And then that was a very interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for doing that in Mongolia, kind of being a focal figure in that regard. And it was so interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And also, again, for being a male champion in this regard through your journalistic outreach. That's really important.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
За хүн үзэгчдээ өнөөдөр манай Defacto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор НҮБ-ын хөгжлийн хөтөлбөр гэж байдаг тийм олон жил Монголд байгаа энэ удаагийн суурин төлөөлөгч нь ИЛЕЙН КОНКИЕВИЧ гэж эмэгтэй энэ хүчирхийллийн тухай эмэгтэйчүүд охтуудын эсрэг хүчирхийллийн тухай нийлээ төвлөрч ярьлаа бодох юм их байгаа багаас нь хүүхдүүдэд анхааруулмаар хүмүүжүүлмээр байгаа юм эрэгтэйчүүдийн үлгэр жишээ болж хүүхдүүдтэй ингээм эмэгтэй хүнийг хайрлах энэ талаар ингэж бас манай нийгэмд хийх юм маш их байгаа тухайд ерөнхий ярьлаа. Баярлалаа.